Polls have closed in Iraqi Kurdistan. And now that citizens have said yes, most probably, to independence, what are they going to do with the result? Regional President Massoud Barzani shrugging off pressure from Baghdad and the international community and sticking with the non-binding vote that's already got the parliament in Baghdad demanding troops be sent to areas disputed with the Kurds, in particular oil-rich Kirkuk. How much of this is about the aspirations of a people to their own nation? How much is about money and a dysfunctional federal Iraq? With so many Kurdish fighters on the front lines against ISIS, the US, France, and Britain worry the referendum will prove a distraction from the urgent task at hand. With Kurdish separatists in Turkey and emboldened militias in Syria, Turkey and Iran don't want to see an independent state. Once the celebrations have subsided, will Kurds find that this vote helps or hurts their cause? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Iraq's Kurds, and with us from Erbil, academic and blogger Ruwaida Mustafa. Many thanks for joining us. Also in the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, commentator Hiwa Osman. Welcome to the show. Hiwa Osman, a former media advisor to Iraqi President Jalal Talabani. From Washington, we welcome back Abbas Kadim, Senior Policy Fellow at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. And we're joined here in the studio by France 24 senior correspondent James Andre, just back from the region. Welcome back, and welcome as well to Fazel Hawrami, a journalist who's in Kirkuk after the close of the polls. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. There are more than 30 million Kurds around the world. They don't have their own nation, but they do share a common language and culture. France 24's Adel Gastel prepared this report, read by Olivia Salazar-Winspear.
Who are the Kurdish people and why do they seek independence? In the 12th century, Seljuk Sultan Ahmad Sanjar was the first to create an official Kurdish province. Today, 30 to 40 million Kurds live in those same territories, but borders are disputed. Kurdistan stretches across parts of Turkey, Iran, Iraq and Syria. The Kurds are of Indo-European descent and live within those nations' populations. Maps of Kurdistan resurfaced in 1919 after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The 1920 Treaty of Sèvres attempted to secure Kurdish autonomy, but that failed. 3 years later, world leaders signed the Treaty of Lausanne, which excluded Kurds. Living as a minority, Kurds have faced repression in Turkey, where Abdullah Öcalan created the PKK, or Kurdish Workers' Party, in 1978. The group's armed fight for an independent state has cost thousands of lives. Turkish intelligence arrested Öcalan abroad in 1999. The PKK has since shifted its strategy, scrapping calls for independence, instead pushing for autonomy. In Turkey, Kurds make up 20% of the population, and a watchful eye is kept on the Kurdish contingency in northern Syria, who show similarities to the PKK. In Iraq, the Kurds have already been governing their autonomous zone since the Gulf War in the 1990s. Iraqi Kurdistan, led by Massoud Barzani, is one of the country's most stable entities. Western powers now consider the Kurds a key player in the fight against Islamic State group jihadists.
Let's begin with Ruwaida Mustafa. Did you go out and vote this Monday? How's your day been?
I did. I voted earlier today. I even took my 3-year-old son. It was a very emotional moment for my family. I felt like for the first time in this region we can have our voices politically heard and participate in a democratic process where we can tell the world and tell Baghdad that we're not happy with our relationship with Baghdad, and more importantly, as Kurdish people, we want to have perhaps a state of our own one day, but at the moment we are really unhappy with Baghdad, and we want to have our voices heard and ensure that unless the central government in Iraq takes the Kurdish leaders seriously, that we will seek other means to statehood.
Our correspondent saying she had a hard time finding people who openly would say they voted no, and she wasn't sure if it's because everyone voted yes or because some people are kind of feel intimidated about going on camera and saying that they didn't want independence. What are your thoughts on that?
The voter turnout is 78%. There was a movement called the No Movement. It did attract limited attention, but overwhelming number of people have voted yes. For those who have voted no, I understand why they would vote no. It's because Baghdad has put so much pressure on the Kurdistan region. It has cut our budget. It has made life much worse. It has even impacted our public hospitals because it has reduced medical supplies. So obviously, people would be unhappy with public services, and largely because of the way Baghdad has been treating the Kurdistan region. If the treatment were better, our people would be more satisfied and more happy to participate in democratic processes. But yes, there are those who voted no. There's a general feeling that that those who vote no are not as nationalistic as those who vote yes, and I think that's why they would abstain from coming on camera. But they have every right to vote as they please, and this is the kind of Kurdistan we want. We want people to be able to vote no, to be able to vote yes. That's what our society is about, differences of views, differences of opinions, and that's what makes this region better than Iraq. It's that we are so diverse in terms of religion, in terms of political views, and I think that's part of the reason why we want to seek a sort of a division or separation eventually.
The division or separation, I see you're choosing your words carefully. Hiwa Osman, your thoughts on what you've just heard in terms of, I mean, the first thing we heard from Ruwaida was that she was really unhappy with Baghdad. What are your thoughts on why this vote took place and what the Kurds will get out of it?
Well, I can certainly tell you that now, today, there's almost a total breakdown of relations between Baghdad and Erbil. Up until yesterday, up until last week, let's say, there was some hope, despite repeated Kurdish attempts to say that the future is only going to be determined through dialogue. This vote is in no way about territory, it's about people. The demarcation line between Arab Iraq and Kurdistan, the new state, if that's to be decided, will be decided through other means. This referendum is in no way about territory, it's about people. But unfortunately, the Baghdad parliament came up with quite a few strong statements, starting by last week, saying that they totally reject the referendum, and that pushed the Kurdistan parliament to totally accept the referendum. In the past, there were parties with and parties against the referendum, the timing of the referendum. But the push from Baghdad over the past few days has forced almost everyone in Kurdistan to say yes. This is why your correspondent could not find any no-sayers. There was a small no movement, as Ruwaida says, but they did not get. I would doubt very much that they got anything more than probably 1 or 2%.
Let me get Abbas Kadim to react to that, because you just heard from Hiwa Osman that, well, the noises from Baghdad's parliament have been so strong-handed that it's, well, forced people into the yes camp.
And I mean, again, he was a good friend, and he's a very good commentator on Iraq issues, not just Kurdish issues. So there is not much to disagree with there. But I think probably I would take an issue with the idea that it is just the Iraqi parliament that made strong statements. The UN, the United States of America, the European Union, individual countries of the UN, countries in the region, Turkey, Iran, Saudi, others, and the government of Baghdad, all of them said no. Pretty much everybody in the world does not recognize this referendum. So that is I mean, there are reasons for that we could talk about.
But it is a non-binding vote, so
but it is not just Baghdad.
It is a non-binding
yes,
vote. So why have, a curfew imposed on Kirkuk? The strong statements out of Baghdad. Why?
Well, other countries, normally when there is a movement that talks about separation, they take measures that are heavier and stronger for less than this. I mean, non-binding, the Kurds did have a non-binding vote before on that, and we know what the Kurds want in terms of their national aspirations. And quite frankly, morally, one cannot stand against people aspiring towards certain legitimate dreams. The problem is how to go about it. I think the scope of it was overreaching. The Kurdistan regional government conducted the vote even in areas where legally are not under their jurisdiction. And they tried to have it both ways in those regions that are outside of Kurdistan. There are many reasons for that, but I believe that, again, the vote is not surprising. I do agree with Hiwa that it would be very hard to find people who would say no. The question is, what will happen after this? Yes, that is actually where we are going. If I may say something about the what Ruwaida just mentioned earlier, I think there are many statements that seems to be not giving the rest of Iraq certain credit. I mean, yes, the Kurdistan is more stable for good reasons, the way they are running their territory, etc. But it is not true to say that the Kurds did not receive anything. The Prime Minister just mentioned that they had been exporting towards 1/4 of total Iraqi production of oil, yet salaries are not paid. All of that money, where did it go? Also, Kurdistan received to the bulk of $130 to $150 billion from Iraq after 2003. It is not really, as they say, they are not getting anything. And that's not to mention the fact that Iraq does have a good Kurdish representation in Baghdad, people including family relatives of people on this program. And, you know, we know that he himself does have a very respectable position in the Iraqi government or in the Iraqi state.
Ruwaida Mustafa, briefly, because I want to pick up on some of these points.
You know,
let me just bring in Ruwaida very briefly. Go ahead.
The electricity will come back in 1 minute. Abbas mentioned, there we go. Abbas mentioned that the Kurdistan region received money from Baghdad, and he's talking about the corruption. Well, I would like to ask a question back to him. The Kurdistan region's share of the budget, around 12%, was received. What did Baghdad do with the rest of the 88%? If you look at the rest of Iraq and Kurdistan region, you would literally be looking at two worlds apart in terms of public services, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of development and innovation. What has Iraq done with that 88%? You talk as though Iraqi officials are not corrupt, but they are corrupt. They are not doing anything for their people. They're very sectarian. You don't have any legitimacy to say that the Kurdistan region has somehow had millions of dollars wasted away when you yourself come from a region that has wasted 88% of its budget time and time again, and a region that has failed to deal with its sectarianism. Part of the reason Kurds want to move away from Iraq is because there's no solution to the problems they face. It's Sunni against Shia year after year. You have a sectarian society that we don't want to be part of. And I think it's unfair for anyone to criticize Kurdistan region if they're not going to criticize their own areas as well.
All right, but before we let me just break in here because we're running a little bit short on time. Before we respond to that, let me bring in James Andre just to once again in a minute, please. Just explain to us, picking up on the point there about this is putting, obviously there's the aspirations of people who live in Iraqi Kurdistan and the strain at the same time, and perhaps you can show us with a map on the federal Iraq the way it is set up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the division of the Iraqi territory dates back to unofficially 1991, officially 2005, when the new constitution was indeed negotiated between Baghdad and Erbil. Now, the situation is as well that it's true that with what happened in 2014, the arrival of the Islamic State group in Iraq and the fact that indeed the Iraqi army fled from a number of cities in this northern part of the country, you can see here that this is basically the territory which is officially under control by the KRG, that is the Kurdish regional government. All this blue and pink part here is the territory that has been gained since 2014. Because indeed, for example, if you take the case of Kirkuk, which is one of the thorniest issues, Kirkuk is basically multicultural city. Just put things into perspective very quickly. Back in the 90s, Saddam Hussein had an Arabization policy in parts of Iraq. Kirkuk was part of that Arabizing policy. So he did make sure that Arabs were moving into the area, also attaching Arab parts of this area to the Kirkuk district in order to make sure that they had a majority there.
And you were last week in Hawija, where there's the offensive going on against ISIS, and that area is on the stripy bit that's claimed by the Kurdish government.
Now, Hawija is, a majority Arab city. This is why it's also under control of IS right now, the Islamic State group. Now, the thing is, you have fighting which is now ongoing in this part, close to Hawija. But right here, between Hawija and Kirkuk, what you have, and we filmed this, okay, is a defense line, which is right now under controlled by the Peshmerga. To give you an idea, normally we flew into Erbil. You don't need a visa, for example, as a French person to fly into Erbil. But you do need normally an Iraqi visa to go to Kirkuk. This was before 2014. Right now, the control over Kirkuk by the Peshmerga is so complete that you do not need a visa anymore. If you have the authorizations to get through the checkpoints of the Iraqi army, you can go to Kirkuk. That is no problem right now. That gives you an idea of how much the control over this disputed area is by the Peshmerga. So indeed, there have been territorial gains. This is probably a reason why this is taking place right now.
So let me bring in Hiwa Osman briefly on this. Hiwa, after ISIS has been chased from Iraq, the way it's looking, that's going to happen sooner rather than later. What will the map of Iraqi Kurdistan look like? Will it be different from the one that's officially laid out?
Well, the demarcation line between Iraqi Kurdistan and Arab Iraq should really be decided through talks with Baghdad, through negotiations with Baghdad. Now, unfortunately, we've been hearing since the morning from Baghdad that they will not negotiate after the referendum. And I believe that this is a very strong statement that they should not make, and a lot of pressure is mounting on the Prime Minister. I believe that the Iraqi Prime Minister, Mr. Haider al-Abadi, is a wise man. He is looking for solution, but he is under immense pressure from his constituency and from other politicians within his political camp for him to be more hardline than them. So as far as the demarcation line, there is a constitutional clause called Article 140, and it provides for normalizing in the areas that are disputed between the various governorates. After normalization, another referendum will take place according to the Constitution.
According to the Constitution.
That will decide the demarcation line between.
Hey, Hiwa, I'm going to have to interrupt you briefly because we have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking after that independence referendum in Iraqi Kurdistan. With us to talk about it, academic and blogger Ruwaida Mustafa, who voted this morning, joins us from Erbil. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Hiwa Osman, commentator, former media advisor to Iraqi President Jalal Talabani, joining us from Washington, D.C. He is Senior Policy Fellow at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. Abbas Khadim, welcome back, and welcome back as well to France 24's James Andre. Doubly welcome back since you're just back from the field. At the heart of the argument between Erbil and Baghdad, and we were talking about it in part one, the ethnically mixed, oil-rich governorate of Kirkuk. Hence, this demand by Iraq parliament that troops be sent to areas disputed with the Kurds. Before the vote, France 24 correspondent Simona Fulton filed this report from Kirkuk.
In the disputed city of Kirkuk, hoisting the Kurdish flag is a controversial matter. Both Baghdad and Erbil lay claim to this oil-rich province. The central government sees Kurdistan's decision to include Kirkuk in the September 25th independence referendum as an effort to annex the area. In the city's main market, many people worry about an uncertain future.
The people of Kirkuk are afraid because of this referendum. They don't want to go through the same instability like in Mosul, Tikrit or Anbar.
The Arab and Turkmen communities oppose the Kurds' drive to hold the referendum in Kirkuk. They fear that their own interests could be overlooked.
The Turkmen and the Arabs don't want for Kirkuk to become part of Kurdistan. Without the agreement between the Turkmen, the Arabs and the Christians, no project can succeed in the city.
This Kurdish member of the local council assures the Arabs and the Turkmen that their rights will be respected in an independent Kurdistan and that Kurdish forces will protect them in case of an armed confrontation with Shia militia called the Hashd al-Shabi.
We oppose Saddam Hussein. We oppose the most savage organization, the Islamic State group. If Hashd al-Shabi want to attack the Kurds and the city of Kirkuk, we are ready to defend ourselves.
But some members of Kirkuk's youth reject the use of force. Murad, a Turkmen musician, bets on the city's long history of diversity instead.
Every day I speak 3 languages. When I meet a Kurd, I speak Kurdish. When I meet an Arab, I speak Arabic. I've known my friends for 20 years, and we never gave much thought to the fact that we are from different ethnic groups.
Despite such show of unity, politicians in Baghdad and Erbil have thus far failed to negotiate a solution. Should tensions spill into violence, the contested province of Kirkuk is likely to be the epicenter of a new civil war.
Hiwa Osman, we saw that musician in that report. How do you overcome the sectarian mindset, not just in Kirkuk, but, well, everywhere in Iraq?
Well, in Kirkuk, historically, the dispute over the territory has been between the Kurds and the Sunni Arabs, who are the original inhabitants of these areas. The former Iraqi regime, Saddam Hussein's regime, brought in Shiite from the south to these areas, and some part of the normalization process has taken place by those who were brought in to be taken back, but some are staying. The problem with Kirkuk today, there is the third element of Al-Hashd al-Shabi, the popular mobilization force that exists there, and Mr. Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, who is on the Iraqi and Syrian ground most of the time, has said in many occasions that he will not stop the Hashd al-Shabi from entering Kirkuk should a declaration of some sort happens by the Kurds. So that means it can become a very difficult, complicated issue. The issue between the Kurds and the Arabs, or namely the Sunni Arabs, is about land. So ultimately it will be solved, but the complicated issue that also happened in the past is between the Shia and the Sunni, because it's about faith. And each one, we've seen it in the past, it has been extremely bloody. Everyone has warned in the past about a Kurd-Arab conflict, but because it is not about faith, it's about land, and it's about negotiations. There are political leaderships on both sides. It can be negotiated, but when you have conflicts based on faith and based on religious values, this is where it becomes very complicated, and it could last for much longer than anticipated. So the complexity of the Kirkuk issue has a special status, but that does not really prevent from conducting the did not really prevent. Today we've seen Kirkuk. The voting has ended now. It was very much a lot more quiet than expected. People thought there will be acts of violence in the city, but it went very smoothly today. From as far up until the time of coming to the studio, I have not heard of any major incidents taking place in Kirkuk. The future is, we have to now, the future of the city will very much depend on the future of negotiations. If Baghdad is willing to negotiate, the Kurds have now said, the vote is now there. The yes vote is there. The Kurds are expressing their willingness to negotiate with Baghdad. The Baghdad government or Baghdad parliament, government and the institutions, they have to respond to that. And if negotiations take place, without getting the outsiders involved, I think Kirkuk can be solved. That will be the starting point in the talks over the future. If they fix it in Kirkuk, I think they can fix it everywhere else.
But sir, you say everything's been calm in Kirkuk during the voting, but tonight there is a curfew in the Turkmen and Arab neighborhoods, not in the Kurdish neighborhoods, so there is potential tension, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear that question.
I said, you say things went smoothly today, but tonight there is a curfew in the Arab and Turkmen neighborhoods of Kirkuk. So how do you explain the fact that there is a requirement for a curfew that is also selective between ethnicities?
Kirkuk, as you know, is on the borderline with ISIS-controlled territory still. Hawija is there. It happened about 2 months ago or more. About 200 ISIS fighters managed to infiltrate Kirkuk and to wreak havoc in the city for a few days until the local forces controlled that. So there is a fear of an external attack on Kirkuk, and there are fears of sleeper cells in the city. For this reason, imposing a curfew is not an abnormal thing, and I think it is a wise thing to do, given the sensitivity of the situation that took place today.
All right, Habas Kadim, we're hearing mixed signals here about, on the one hand, the vote going off peacefully, on the other, mistrust, the curfew. Is there the possibility for de-escalation between Erbil and Baghdad and over cities like Kirkuk?
Good question. Let me first respond to what Ruwaida just mentioned earlier, because it was directed at me. I was basically making fact checks or facts check for what she was doing or saying, and what she said were not facts. That's why I am not trying to defend the Iraqi government. Had she read my last article and all my previous work, I'm a major critic of Baghdad's government. And the last was, again, my article about the topic just 3 days ago in the Huffington Post. So I just checked some of the facts, and they were not facts that she mentioned in terms of the Kurds.
And on the issue of what you've what Hiwa Osman just said, and on Kirkuk.
Yeah, on the de-escalation, there has to be a de-escalation. I mean, it's Iraq does not need more war. And that's why many people who rejected, including international community actors who rejected this referendum, they said because it is not helpful for restoring calm and peace to Iraq when you are still fighting a war and then you open a new front on the basis of national disputes in the middle of a fight against the worst terrorist organization the world has faced. It is just unwise, untimely, and it's bad. So it is now the job of the wise leaders, as Hiwa just mentioned, from both sides, to de-escalate this, make sure that they do not take measures that Iraq will regret. And certainly one of the ways of de-escalation is to try to not let foreign actors in the region especially to interfere and make the situation worse.
Which foreign actors?
Iraq, whether it's the Arab part of Iraq or the Kurd part of Iraq, are all one country. What is that?
Which foreign actors?
What is that? I'm sorry.
You mentioned you don't want foreign
Iran,
actors
Turkey,
intervening. Can you name them?
These are the two countries that are interested in it. I said Iran and Turkey. These are the main countries that are right now have a direct stake. Any destabilization in Iraq over the Kurdish independence will directly deal with them. Both of them have sizable populations that are Kurd, and both of them don't want a repeat. Especially, both of them deny the Kurds any measure of what Iraq allows the Kurds right now, and they do not want the aspirations of their own Kurds to be higher than what they want them to be, and that's a major issue. So both countries need to be out of the conflict equation, and then confine it to.
Let's pick up on that point. Let's pick up on that point. Iran closing its airspace with Iraqi Kurdistan, Turkey positioning tanks, and the president there threatening to shut both the border along with the oil pipelines that run through it.
Bakalım After this, we'll see through which channels the Iraqi Kurds send their oil and who they sell it to. We have the valve, and the moment we close it, the oil stops flowing.
Ruwaida Mustafa, what's your reaction? All right, we seem to have a lot. We seem to still have issues there connecting. James Entree, Turkey has had normal commercial ties with Iraqi Kurdistan.
Very much so. I mean,
when President Erdogan threatens to shut the border and to shut the oil pipelines, how serious is he?
Well, he's potentially very serious. The fact of the matter is, Turkey is the first commercial partner of Iraqi Kurdistan. Iraqi Kurdistan is the fourth commercial partner of Turkey. Now, the fact of the matter is the Turkish economy obviously is a lot bigger, and also Turkey is not landlocked. What's really a threat right now for Iraqi Kurdistan is the fact that it is completely landlocked. Now, Iran has already closed its border, and it's not letting planes fly into Erbil. Iraq itself is actually threatening Erbil with the fact of closing their airspace, which technically they can do. They can potentially, if they so wish, ban planes from landing at Erbil International Airport. Turkey is threatening on closing their borders, and obviously to the south it's easy for Iraq to stop any transport. Now, the fact of the matter is, in that case, you would have a besieged country with basically landlocked and with no possibilities of exchange with anybody apart maybe through the Syrian border, but that only takes you to Rojava, which is the Kurdish part there. So it would become a very, very thorny situation for the Iraqi Kurdistan if that were to happen.
Hey, well, Osman, how seriously do you take that threat to close the oil pipelines that run to Turkey by President Erdogan?
Well, I think he has to say this again. He says that we have to wait and see, especially that all the talks that the oil trading is not very transparent, and he himself and his family have allegedly make some profit from that. They take a cut from that pipeline. So again, I'm not very sure how serious is that. We'll have to see if they seriously do it or not, because he did not say that they will cut it. He says, if we cut it, what will happen? Where would they sell it? So again, we have to see, because the other thing with Turkey that I think the Turkish leadership or President Erdogan is aware that if he imposes severe sanctions or penalty sanctions on Iraqi Kurdistan, he will end up with another wave of refugees on his plate that will go, because people from here, if situation deteriorates here, they are not going to flee to Iran. They definitely are not going to flee down south to Baghdad. They will make their way to Turkey with the hope of getting to Europe. So he will end up with probably another 1 million Iraqi Kurds who are politicized and who will see him as one of the causes of causing this misery. So again, I think he has to say whatever he's saying, but we have to wait for his actions.
Ruwaida Mustafa, do you agree that Erdogan's bark may be worse than his bite on this one?
Question.
Yeah, I was asking, do you think Erdogan's bark may be worse than his bite when it comes to closing the oil pipelines?
Well, we don't actually know, because Erdogan is very, he always gives very emotional speeches. He always makes very overdramatic remarks. So I don't know whether this is just his regular speeches that were made today, or if he's actually going to, do something quite worse for the region. But let's not forget that Turkey has invested billions into Kurdistan region. So it's not going to make our economy crumble on its feet very quickly, because it would also harm its interests, since KRG has shared critical intel with them in terms of curbing activities with the PKK group.
So, okay, if you've got a crystal ball there with you, Ruwaida, what's going to happen now? After this vote, after the results have been read out, what's going to happen, really?
I personally think that it's unlikely that Turkey would close all borders and shut down any access to Kurdistan region. I also think any military intervention is very, very unlikely, simply because the Peshmerga troops have been at the forefront of fighting ISIS, and more importantly because it's just unforeseeable or unexpected that having a referendum to make our political will known will lead to a military intervention. It's not a crime to have a referendum. Even the Iraqi constitution allows regions to have referendums for themselves, not to separate, but to make their political wills known. So I hope what will happen is that KRG and Baghdad can have negotiations and come to a terms whereby both Kurdistan region and Baghdad are better off, whether as neighbors or as strategic allies, we don't know. But I truly hope that this doesn't spiral into violence, but instead leads to more understanding, simply because the Kurdish people, especially the youth, are fed up with Baghdad. The majority don't speak Arabic. The majority don't have any shared values with our neighboring Arabs. So what we want is democracy. What we want is a better region or country for ourselves, and Baghdad is not letting us make that happen.
Hiwa Osman, is there a way for there to be a reconciliation? You're a former advisor not to the president of Iraqi Kurdistan, but to the president of the nation of Iraq. Can Iraq, as it exists now, will it still exist in 5 years, for instance?
I think it can exist. We are at a situation whereby the people of Iraqi Kurdistan have given their say, have said what they want for the future. The Iraqi government, the Iraqi political elite on the other side, they have to heed these warnings. I think today's referendum was an alarm bell for everybody else in Iraq. They need to see that the way they have managed, governed, administered Iraq hasn't worked. So they have to look at an alternative way. And the international partners who have tried to stop the referendum and failed, today they are under another duty, namely Iran, Turkey and America. They need to keep peace in Iraq. They need to pressure all sides to go into dialogue and to go peacefully into the next phase, whether it is 2 states, 1 state, federal, confederal, change of constitution, whatever the end result is, it has to be negotiated between Erbil and Baghdad. And I think that's the only option. Otherwise, we have a very difficult situation. There are about 1 million Arabs, civilians, IDPs, internally displaced people, in Iraqi Kurdistan, and there are about 1 million Kurds, indigenous to the areas that are under Baghdad's control or in Baghdad. So retaliation acts can be a very risky thing to happen. And both leadership are under the duty to normalize, to calm, to appease, and to go through that, to look at dialogue as the only mean of settling the current dispute. The international community, Iraq's friends, France, America, Britain, Turkey, and the Gulf states and Iran are really under the duty not to fuel the disputes further, and work with both sides to make them reach a peaceful settlement of their disputes.
Just very briefly, because we're almost out of time, James Andre, we heard last week the French Foreign Minister talk about inopportune having this referendum now. You just heard Hiwa Osman saying how the international community can play a role now in bringing all sides to reason. How much clout does the outside world have when it comes to Iraq right now?
Well, that's very unclear. The fact of the matter is, what we did see, and this is a big question mark, honestly, for me, I've been following all this over the past few days over there. Yes, Massoud Barzani gave himself a bargaining chip by organizing this referendum, and basically his offer on the table was, if you make me an offer that's interesting enough, then I will cancel. Now the referendum's taken place. What's the next step? What's the bargaining chip? What is he going to be able to use to leverage the international community, who made it very clear they were anti-referendum, and to leverage Baghdad, because Baghdad has still not given the Kurds what they want, and how is that going to change from now on? That is a big question mark.
Right, so the outgoing president, who may have played his joker card too soon, James Andre, many thanks. We'll see. Ruwaida Mustafa, Hiwa Osman, many thanks for joining us from Erbil. I want to thank Abbas Khadim for joining us from Washington. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. Enter James Creedon. How are you?
Francois, very well, thanks. So just to look at how this has been playing out on social networks, a lot of tweeting by Kurds in English, this is, of course, a lot of it is an effort to market the idea of Kurdish independence. So you've got Massoud Barzani, one of many who has been tweeting today in English with the hashtag Kurdistan referendum. Proud to cast my vote earlier this morning and partake in this historic day, the day of Kurdistan referendum. This is the head of the KRG, Department of Information Technology. So one could imagine that he also has a certain message to get out if he's tweeting in English. Traffic police helping handicapped and elderly people who insist to participate in the Kurdistan referendum. So there's a real effort here on the behalf of the KRG party to show that this is the will of the people, that even people who are handicapped or whatever, they want to get out there and they want to have their voice counted. Reporters also in the region, such as Nafisa Konavard of the BBC, amongst others, tweeting today saying, an unusual day at Erbil checkpoint, security guy offers us chocolate. So clearly somewhat
Did
festive.
they offer you chocolate, James?
No, they did not.
All right. wrong day, perhaps. Here you have others showing the actual moment of casting the vote in that referendum. Words cannot describe my emotions after voting in Kurdistan's referendum on independence. This, again, is somebody, the Deputy Prime Minister of Kurdistan. So all of those tweets in English regarding the Kurdish referendum are often people in high positions within the Kurdish power structures. Here you have Kurds in Austria gathering in front of the parliament in support of the Kurdistan vote. So there were expressions of support outside of Kurdistan. And I suppose with the most tension in Iraq or in Turkey, where there are, of course, big Kurdish communities and where it's a very political question. Kurds in Iran are on the street to support Kurdistan referendum, and that is an image of what it describes. Now, just a quick look as well at some analysis pieces. We won't have time to go into the details of it, but just the kind of the headlines, the broad sweeps. The big question is what's next. You've been talking about it this evening, and it is, of course, very open-ended. It'll depend a lot on Baghdad. It'll depend on Turkey, what they're going to do with oil policy, whether or not they're going to really make the Kurds suffer. This is a Daily Sabah in Turkey, and they're very much covering Erdogan's line and his threats in that regard, that they could really create some serious economic problems for Kurdistan, the Kurdish state, if they do continue with the move towards independence. Meanwhile, in Iran, also against the whole bid, some interesting theories emerging on Press TV there. This is Major General Yahya Rahim Saravi. He's a top military advisor, and from their point of view, this is a US-Israeli plot to partition Iraq, which is interesting because then when you go to the Israeli media, the Jerusalem Post, we're reading about why the US chose to oppose the Kurds.
Israel is for the referendum.
It's the one and only country.
Right. So that seems perhaps not the full and complete picture anyway emerging from Press TV, because the US certainly seems to be opposing this referendum, and it's finding itself in that regard in the awkward position of being on the same side as Iran. So this is all a rather complex picture.
All right. Many thanks for that, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.